All right. Well, here we are on a brand new episode of Labors for Neighbors. I am a first-time host here, so I'm going to be asking some questions of Joe Little, a good friend of mine who I met. We met in, of all places, Home Depot. Do you remember the first time that we met, Joe?
I do.
You do. Do you remember what I was wearing the first time?
You were wearing something biblical.
I was wearing a T-shirt with my favorite show that I don't know how to describe it, but it's The Chosen.
I love The Chosen.
Yeah,
you and I are big fans of The Chosen.
We are, and you asked me about the T-shirt as my wife and I were in there looking at flooring for our house, and we struck up a conversation, and here we are, years later, I should say. It's been more than a year, so.
It takes guts to do an interview. It takes guts to be on an interview. It takes guts to do it.
Well, I'm braving the challenge, and so here we are, and I want to ask you some questions to get to know you better, but also to get to know more about you and where you come from and what's your purpose with podcasting in general. So hopefully this goes well, Joe.
Thank you.
First question I have for you is, where'd you come up with the name for this podcast?
I'm a spelling reform enthusiast, as many people know. Labors for Neighbors is a silly spelling. Labors is the normal conventional spelling of labors. For, the number sign 4, is a simple, marketable way of saying for. Neighbors, Nabors. Anyone in the world who has a lick of sense and thinks about it for a minute will tell you that is the correct spelling of neighbors, not the convoluted way we spell it. And so the show is an excuse to use a simplified spelling. But just the show itself was a response to COVID and the fact that half of the population, give or take, they were saying in their language, the powers that be were saying is non-essential. Well, 1/3 of the population is essential. Nurses, doctors, cops, truck drivers, I guess.
How about educators?
No, you had to stay home, didn't you?
Yes, we did have to stay home there. We had to do Google Meets education and Zoom meetings and all the other types of online learning for a good 9 weeks before we were allowed to go back to school.
So I'll say that, So you know how it feels, but even then you were required to do your job, and you did your job, and so you were quasi-essential. I was not essential. Was I a bus driver at the time? I was a bus driver at the time. My class and I were let go. That was fine, but I was between jobs at the time, and I said, how do I use my time wisely? And the answer in my brain anyway was do a podcast to meet people, to lift them up, because my theory is that everyone in the world is doing something good, not just for themselves, but for other people. If I brush my teeth well, a naysayer would say, well, you're just brushing your teeth for yourself. And that's true. But really, I'm not going to brush it as well if I have 0 people that I'm meeting that day or seeing that day. I may not even brush it. So really, I'm brushing my teeth and doing whatever I do kind of sort of to bless other people. And I wanted people to know, even that were being said that they were non-essential and were feeling 1% suicidal, you are more valuable than they are saying. Keep up the good work, because you are doing good work, even in this time of funk.
All right. That's a great explanation. Labors for neighbors. and again, I like your spelling of neighbors better than the proper. Speaking of, you said you were a bus driver. Where were you a bus driver at?
Greyhound
bus driver.
I was before that. I was for a season.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a public relations guy, and I've done most of my 98% of my work has been public relations with the American Literacy Council, and for about 15 years, and it continues even today. And then New York City Rescue Mission for 10 years. I'm proud of both stints. I accomplished, in my brain, I feel like I accomplished very good work. in the first job and in the second job. And
So you were duly employed?
I wasn't duly. The first 15 years was American Literacy Council, and then I transitioned to the New York City Rescue Mission, and then I transitioned to Nothingville. I was between jobs, and but I was doing creative writing, and I did a show called not a show, a well, it wanted to be a show called Twilight Time, based on the Twilight Zone. My theory regarding Twilight Zone is that the charm of it, besides Rod Serling and his great writing, is it's a balance of good and evil. It's half the shows, if you think about it, are very light and end in a twist with the things go well for the protagonist. The other half of the shows gives a twist, and the protagonist is a funk devil, and he deserves some funk, and he gets some funk, and that's the twist. But if you have a little bit of both, then it's more entertaining than if it's all macabre. Later on, Rod Serling, if you recall, did a show called Night Gallery, and every episode was macabre. And that's fine if you want to do 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3 macabre shows that are macabre. But if every show is macabre, oh my goodness, let's go back to sleep and have a gin and tonic.
Gotcha.
And so the show that I did, I wrote 6 or 7 episodes of. I'm not a writer, but they were decent stories. Is Twilight Time, and so that's what I did off and on for years. Believe it or not. I raised my family. That was my main job. My wife and I have 3 youngins. So, and we had enough savings. I must have done odd jobs, but maybe I didn't. I think we lived on our savings. And so finally push came to shove, and I got a job with the New York City bus department, the traffic department. I was a bus driver for a season. That wasn't for me. I could do it, but it was just a drag on my brain and spirit. So I transitioned, but I was a decent driver. So I transitioned to Greyhound, and that was more scenic, a little bit more relaxed, and not carefree, certainly, but going to different towns, Richmond, Virginia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'd never been to Pittsburgh, so it was a pleasure to travel to these places and get to know the people.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, if you're based out of New York City, driving a bus, and you get to go to different places, East Coast, Midwest. I mean, had you ever been to farther than Pittsburgh?
Well, yes, I had been to Wisconsin. Okay. I had been, of course, through Chicago, but I had never experienced these places to speak of. I've been to California. I've been to I've been to Holland and France, and so I've done scattered traveling. But in terms of seeing the land and seeing that Harrisburg has nothing to do with Pittsburgh, Harrisburg has nothing to do with Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is in one state called New Jersey. Pittsburgh is in a different state called Ohio. Nobody knows this. Harrisburg is in the state of Pennsylvania. Harrisburg is the capital of Pennsylvania. But Pittsburgh and Harrisburg and Philadelphia have virtually nothing in common. It's interesting to see this as you drive the land. Harrisburg is right in the middle of the state. Philadelphia is 1 foot away from New Jersey. Pittsburgh is 1 foot away from Ohio. And that's really the lay of the land. That's really how it rolls. And Pittsburgh hates Philadelphia. Philadelphia doesn't understand Pittsburgh enough to hate them. I mean, it's just a peculiarity.
How long did you live in New York City?
From 89 to 2 years ago, 22. So
22.
So almost 34 years.
Did you meet your wife in New York City?
Yes, I was going to Redeemer Presbyterian Church. You and I are Christians, and I was a deacon at the time, Redeemer Presbyterian Church, Tim Keller.
Yep.
And I was in the first deacon class. That's one of my God is still scratching his head how he pulled that one off.
He chooses.
And a deacon and a deaconess were at the front of the church after the service, answering questions or praying for people if they had a prayer request. And a pretty woman named Mimi walked up. I didn't know her from Adam. And later on, she said that my eye twitched, which is fair enough because she's very pretty. She's very beautiful. And so she had a prayer request, whatever it was. And I remember, I keep a journal, and my journal is not every day. I try to make it every day, but it is turned into every month. And in my journal, I said, da da da, ba ba da, ba da ba, da da da. Prayed for a woman named Mimi. She's cute. And then ba da da, and then went on to, like she got a mention the very first.
So your eye twitched because she caught your eye.
And she has a wonderful personality. You still haven't met her, which is a shame. We'll try to make that happen. But yeah, a year later, by hook and by crook, we got married. And like I say, we have 3 youngins, and they are in parts unknown, but they're doing well. And so that's probably arguably the biggest achievement in life, as you know, is marriage on the first hand and family on the second hand.
Another blessing. So yes. So in all your travels through a Greyhound bus, had you ever heard of Fort Wayne, Indiana, before you landed here?
I had heard of it. I didn't have an opinion, as I don't have an opinion for most cities that I haven't ventured to. I didn't have much of an opinion of Indiana. It's the Midwest, which is fine, and
to fly
it's kind of say
to fly over state for most people.
It's a flyover state.
Drive through straight.
I couldn't have told you that it was corn. Nebraska Cornhuskers. That's all I know of corn.
Yeah.
And so they've claimed that, but there's 5 or 8 states that are nothing but corn. And, you could think that it's dwindling, but I think there's a 1% chance that it's actually expanding, which is kind of how can you expand your crop acreage, but maybe they're finding a way to do it. So I had not heard of Fort Wayne. In my Labors for Neighbors show, I met a hardware guy that I interviewed, and he introduced me to the fact that hardware stores were doing well during COVID, were booming, and I was shocked. I thought, well, everything is down, all sales are down. Nope, hardware stores were booming, including this store I'd never heard of called Do It Best. I thought that was the dumbest name I'd ever heard of. Do It Best? Are you crazy? But they are number 2 in the country.
That's awesome.
How can they be number 2 if there's no commercials? I had never seen it. There are no commercials. Well, because my theory was that they out-friendly Ace and True Value, etc. And it's a sound theory because if you are a local owner of your shop, which they all are at Do It Best, some of the Ace stores are locally owned, some are not. So if you're not a local owner of an Ace store, you have ownership in the store, but not as much as if you owned the store outright. And so you're not going to be quite as friendly. You don't have quite as much skin in the game as someone who owns their store and trains up their employees and hires the right employees that are friendly and connect with the customer and make the customer their friend. They're friends. So my show was called so they're besties. They're best friends with their customers. The name of the show, in keeping with Do It Best, was Besties. And that was my secret plan, was to move to when we had a son that got into Notre Dame, Indiana, and was a freshman there. We missed him. And COVID was pushing us out of New York City. And he didn't know it, but he was pulling us toward Indiana, and especially Fort Wayne, which is the headquarters town of Do It Best. So I said, "Ooh, I'll move there. I'll move into Do It Best." They didn't agree with me. They're still trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing, but the local store owners understand it and they buy in. So,
well, that's a great summation of what brought you to Fort Wayne, and it's even a better summation of how we became friends, friendliness and openness and honesty. And it's been a pleasure talking with you and getting to know you best as well. And so thanks for being on Labor for Neighbors.